Yeah, so this should be interesting. This is also going to be, I guess, take one of me uh, doing this, so this should be fun. So today's presentation is on biomimicry. I think I said that right. I think I spelled that wrong, actually. Maybe not. No one will know. Yeah, so I feel like this type of what'd you say?
Maybe it's missing a K or something. I could be wrong.
Got to. Whoa.
A couple of K's in there.
Yeah, no, I felt that this talk was, I mean, I didn't really know what to talk about, but I felt that, it would kind of be relevant since we talked about cyber, I forget what it is, cybernetics last week. Yes, sorry, I had a brain fart. So, yeah. And this also kind of relates to what I'm doing in school for research in some ways. So this is kind of my perspective on this. And I guess like this can be super involved with this group because we're either, computer scientists in some way or biologists, which is, two different unique perspectives on similar problems. And so like, yes, what is biomimicry? It's basically, using the design of nature, animals, microbes in your design. And so this has been something that's been going on for ever, basically. I guess ever since man was, man, he looked around his environment and tried to mimic his environment to better survive. And this is a pretty good quote. I'm sure you guys can read it. But the end goal is basically to create something that's sustainable. And you see that in architecture, engineering, computer science, a little bit more. So I guess like some really cool things to pull out, like we all kind of know airplanes went by the same type of design philosophy. You have like Leonardo da Vinci. I don't know if there's anyone earlier than Leonardo da Vinci who did sketches or tried to fly using wings like birds, but you have, going from Leonardo da Vinci to the Wright brothers, that kind of process, mimicking like how birds use their wings, aerodynamics. Of course, we learned from failure, but that type of design philosophy led to the creation of airplane, Velcro, the same type of idea. That was a pretty cool little story about how the guy, George de Mestral, basically invented Velcro. The bullet train, a similar, I guess, like different motivation. The motivation was to create trains that whenever they broke the sound barrier did not, disturb the people around them. So they had to figure that out. And the inspiration was the kingfisher bird. And then I guess the rest are also different things that you can kind of see. One of the most interesting ones, I guess, inspiration was drawn from was the grid management and cargo distribution network system that was inspired by leaf veins, and from the work done at the Rockefeller University. I think that was pretty wild how they did an analysis on leaf veins to kind of optimize how cargo was distributed, but then also how like packets in the network should be distributed based upon load, based upon a leaf, distributing nutrients to different parts of itself. That, kind of blew my mind.
That's
If anyone has,
wait, I got it. So grid management, cargo distribution networks based on leaf veins. Is this like a mathematical model? Did they like take gains and then
yeah,
reproduce? Really?
made a mathematical model. Yeah, it's pretty wild.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
My comment is it's pronounced exactly the way you spelled it. Biomimicry.
Awesome. Yeah. So those are just a few examples. I'm sure there's so many more examples of different inventions. And then kind of like specifically kind of in the technical field, you have, robotics, computer viruses. I'm sure, computer viruses weren't inspired by biology, but they were named after biology, kind of how, they replicate themselves in computer systems. Genetic programming, which kind of is super interesting topic where algorithms basically try to evolve to the optimal solution to then solve the problem. And this is super interesting because of how it relates to neural networks, which are kind of in a way like mathematical functions that try to mimic how brains work, and then pack on information in layers. And it's really interesting that in some sense, I guess people talk a lot about neural networks and machine learning in terms of quantum computers. But I guess like it's not scary, but like the more interesting, I guess, like model of this development of things that evolve over time is like quantum genetic algorithms that basically use that process of evolving in parallel on quantum computers to where they can find solutions to specific things faster, which is, it's like, okay. Hopefully I explained that correctly.
No, it's a really interesting concept, and especially like in quantum computing, the problem of the processing and error checking and having some sort of validation that like the program is complete seems to be this problem that's plaguing that field, and they're trying to come up with like novel methods for it. And it's kind of like, it's really interesting to look at things from neural networks because they're using statistics. They're trying to you're fitting something statistically the best fit of a model. And I really do feel like the next generation of math, what we have to start to accept is this probabilistic reality, not what is possible, but what is most probable. Just like in like Newtonian calculus doesn't deal with finite numbers. They're approximations of, the real power of calculus is the approximation of a function. And I feel like, Gibbs and these people who brought in statistics into physics, we're starting to see like this new, it's gonna have to be a paradigm shift. Like we're gonna have to like think differently about things. It's not gonna be a quantifiable equation. It's gonna have to be statistics, and we have to be okay with it. And that fitting of, data that like we're okay with saying we don't know how it fits this, but it does. And just accepting that.
Yeah, I feel that.
Impressive rant.
I don't know what you said.
I said that was an impressive rant.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting though, because it actually relates to what I'm going to talk about next. I don't know if it's in the next slide or the next slide. But then, systems engineering, we'll skip this and go to so where are we now? And this is kind of in relation to, I guess, like this security field, right? Because you think about computers, you think about software engineering and then security as like two different things. You see neural networks and you see genetic algorithms as kind of like that step towards using nature to create sustainable, but also adapting like more intelligent systems. And when it comes to security, we're still trying to figure out this complexity science and how it applies to system design, trying to kind of like put it all together in a way that makes sense. And so when you think about like computers, arguably, computers came to existence within the 1940s. You could argue that, rudimentary calculators or other type of systems were invented earlier. But this is kind of like the modern day computer timeline. And then the virus, the brain virus, the MS-DOS, first MS-DOS virus is spawned in 1986. So it's a very early age of a technology. And then thinking about how like the internet came into existence, I want to say the 1970s, but I could be wrong, mid 1970s. Hyper interconnected systems in terms of the computer networks is relatively young. And that's kind of in comparison to the innovation that we saw kind of with the airplane. If we kind of say Leonardo da Vinci was, I guess, the time between AD and BC, which is 0, then it took airplanes 4 centuries to become what the Wright brothers kind of envisioned and having them take off. And so we're within 100 years of the maturation of computers, which is really interesting to think about. And so we have these super hyper connected systems. I have people throwing around buzzwords like IoT systems, and everything's kind of getting so connected. And we have to think about security, have to think about like, how do we protect this fragile system? How can we kind of design the network of tomorrow? How can we ensure, or how can we take the sustainability that we see in nature in these adaptive systems and apply it to computers and computer networks? And so
What's
this
an
is
IoT
kind of,
system?
sorry, it's IoT is information of things. Yeah. So for example, it'd be like your Alexa, your Amazon Echo, communicate with it, your smart fridge that you can, browse social media from. Basically anything that's not, anything that connects to the internet that isn't a laptop or desktop or cell phone.
Internet of Things is what you meant to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it might possibly relay all of your audio recordings to China if there's just a small module hidden within the chip.
Yeah. Very true. Very true. And so this is kind of like where the whole cybernetics meets complexity, right? It's like cybernetics is, in a sense, breaking down something to where you can understand it, right? But then in complex adaptive systems or in multiple agent systems, multi-agent systems, even if you have a good understanding of the agent or a particular agent in the system, it doesn't mean that you'll have a good understanding of the entire system. And this is the problem that we're running into in security and system design, because we can understand like, hey, we can use this specific technology to do this specific thing and the whole system will be more secure. When in actuality, that's not the case, and that's never the case. And so that's why my comment before, we're still trying to understand this complexity science. We're still trying to understand how systems made up of all these different components come together to create a design that makes sense, but is also sustainable and is not fragile and has to be maintained all the time.
That's a really interesting concept. I like to kind of like just think about that from like, so like the people who know medicine on this call, I'm curious to know, like, what do you think about the way that we approach this problem in security, focusing on an agent and not the overall system? I feel like there's some sort of overlap with medicine, for example, where we find that there's a particular type of cancer and then we immediately attack that specific thing of cancer, but then we find out that we're actually doing more damage than good. So I'm like, does that seem similar? Does it seem like the same type of thought, like the same solution? Like we're trying to attack the problem the same way?
Yeah, that's spot on. That's exactly what modern medicine, big medicine, tends to do, and that's a big problem. But it's also a way that big medicine makes a ton of money, because the what it's called personalized medicine, attacking the specific receptors, it leads to if it's successful, it leads to a lot of profit, very expensive designer drugs. But in the end, it's not particularly effective. The systemic approach is always going to be more effective. It's spot on.
Back to
It's a good analogy.
Dr. Trevon, though, that's crazy, because who's putting out these solutions? Who's saying, oh, buy this product, fix all your problems? Like, where is all this coming from?
It's very interesting. I didn't even.
It's like the money thing is like really just.
Yeah. I feel that. So I guess like this comes into kind of like system design, and I guess this would have a direct relation to, I guess, biology. I'll try to kind of like create, like say these things in very, I guess, rudimentary ways so that we can like make connections kind of as a group. And so I guess computer immunology was an idea, I guess, that was published in Usenex in like 1998, which is the first kind of guy coming out and saying, hey, the body, the nervous system, the autonomic system is really good at doing the things that we want to see like done in our computer systems. How can we get there? And then autonomic computing is basically just coined by IBM, and it's the whole like self-regulating, self-optimizing, still the type of like, how can we employ I guess regulating like features within our systems that, you know, would emulate like white blood cells, red blood cells, right? We don't want every agent or computer being able to control or to destroy components within a network. But then at the same time, we need to have some type of way to deliver information. And so everything probably shouldn't be connected. There's so many things, so many nuances that probably are second nature to a biologist because they study these type of systems, right? We in the computing field are coming to this realization and having to learn biology. It's really interesting.
It's amazing that it's called autonomic computing after the autonomic nervous system, which yeah, I mean that's like the background. It's, you know, it's the fight or flight thing that it can either be sympathetic, which is you know, exciting, or parasympathetic, which is calming, but it regulates all that in the background. That's so cool.
Yeah, I agree. And so I guess like getting to kind of the components or like the component responsibilities, you know, this is kind of where, you know, this is where everything kind of goes to, yeah, it gets kind of bad. And so there's arguments over all of these different points in computing. I guess even if you go to like software engineering or security, there's arguments on how to do any which one of these things. Awareness is a really big focus and field, and that, you know, deals with machine learning algorithms, self-awareness. What is the purpose? Like, how do you delegate purpose? If you do something, who do you impact within a network, and how do you, you know that you impacted someone in your network? And then one of the most popular examples would be, say, a system gets infected and you're connected to a DNS server, a domain resolution server, which basically you can look up websites to. It translates like Google into whatever IP Google is, and you're able to navigate to Google. If there's an error in your network and you take down that service, then you're not going to be able to know where Google is. And so in a sense, you won't be able to be connected to the internet, right? But you may have solved the problem, but made the whole system as a whole worse because you took down this ability to figure out where things were, which is interesting. Okay. Immutability, which is kind of the ability to have, I guess, state in terms of, say, I guess, for example, iPhone is always doing releases, right? 13.5.1 is the current state of what you can get released. Based upon what you do on your phone, you may have an update 3.5.1, but you may also have an app that's on version 1. And someone else may also have an app that's on version 1.5, right? Immutable basically is the idea that you can have a state like that update 3.5.1 to where you can continue to go back to and not have to basically manage the updates of the apps, right? So if I'm on 1.0, then that would also be a part of version 13.5.1. So Apple would basically be maintaining the, or not Apple, but the system would be basically maintaining at this update point, everything is going to be on one specific version. And then when we go to another version, we're going to update every other application to be on another specific version to where it's immutable. We can quickly delegate and move out different versions to machines, and we know kind of the state that everything is at.
This
you
is
want to say something?
This is interesting. So the name immutable, and I'm thinking immunity, and it sounds like you're developing like this for the application itself. You can use these older versions, right? They won't affect the newer versions. The newer versions won't affect the older version, right? Is that what this basically means? The newer version has an immunity. It won't affect these older versions.
In some ways, right? It's I guess it would be if it's basically standardizing versions, right? So for example, the flu virus, right? We get a new flu virus every year, and I guess it's for an older flu, right? So if I get a flu virus from 2 years ago and I haven't gotten the flu virus from another year, then I would know that I'm immune to the flu from 3 years ago, but not the current flu. So I guess in the same way, it works like that, right? So if we're talking about patches and making sure your system is secure, and you should be able to compare what patch you have or what version you're on with what you are secure from in some ways, right? But in a lot of ways, it's like a methodology in, I guess, the system administrator perspective of, knowing the state of a system. So it does relate to immunity, actually, now that I think about it.
Can you explain the awareness example again?
So yes, awareness is just an agent basically knowing what it is, right? And what it's able to do, and what other agents are around it. And so I guess if you look at this image, let's see. Okay, this image isn't good for awareness, but so
That's an example with like a Google server that you talked about.
Got you. Yeah. So say an agent is maintaining the integrity of a system, right? And so it's able to issue changes to the system. And so in computing, the domain name service DNS basically allows you to look up where the Google server is and then go to the Google server, right? But if you're remediating a error in the system, and it means that you have to take down the domain name server, that means that you would also put the environment in a worse state than it was already in to remediate something, right? And so in some sense, awareness would be able to say, this remediation comes at the cost that brings the network to a lower integrity. Should I do this or should I not do this, right? I mean, in our minds, in logically thinking, like, no, we wouldn't do that. We would just go unpatched and, hope that we don't get, more problems. But
I guess the analogy is someone's house is on fire and you say, oh, I'll solve it. And then you bulldoze their house.
Yeah.
That makes sense. That's like when you're the doctor and your surgeon is like, all right, we can take out this organ. And then you got to be like, do I want to live without this? Can I live without this? That's what it reminds me of.
Yeah. That actually makes more sense. It's like, do we want to remove your heart,
Yeah. I'll keep my heart, but you can take my gallbladder. Take that out.
Yeah, it's an equal trade. Yeah, so awareness and kind of like that also, I guess, relates to reactive reasoning. Local state, global state also deals with awareness. Like, awareness is something that's super important, and that's why there's so much research going into awareness, but also so much research going to awareness. Ability to react. There's ways to react now in systems called orchestration technology, which basically, you can program some way to do many things at one time, which is that's a really interesting even field of software engineering right now, because there's a lot of companies coming out with really cool tools that could do some awesome things, but also could wreak havoc if they're not set up right. And then ephemeral just basically means that the state of something isn't permanent. So if I tear it down and put it back up, or the ability to tear something down and put it back up. And so I would say, like, ephemeral directly relates to these last two, and is probably a pretty recent development within the field of system administration computing. Maybe within the last 10 years. There's something called DevOps, or infrastructure as code, which basically allows you to program whatever states you want your environment to be in, and then you can just tear it up and tear it down pretty seamlessly instead of sitting at a computer for hours and installing a bunch of stuff.
I find this really interesting from like a philosophical standpoint too, because it's like having awareness of yourself and your surroundings is crucial. being immutable, so just dealing with changes and accepting them and moving forward, and then reactive reasoning, being able to understand the consequences or the outcomes of things and making those decisions, and then ephemeral, never staying in like one state for so long, because it's impossible. Like you really can't do that in life. Like it seems like that until something comes in and rocks the boat. So I feel like it's interesting that this is so much about security, and then philosophically this is also a very interesting, I see these bullet points also in a philosophical view as well.
Yeah.
That's true. It sounds like psychological concepts almost.
Yeah. I think what's interesting is just like when you really think about it, it's like you can see it from a security perspective, but then it also makes sense from like a lot of other different perspectives, right? If I'm a software engineer wanting to like make sure Facebook doesn't go down, right? I want to make sure that I have some type of backup for Facebook that can continue to come back to where if someone is trying to access Facebook, it's always accessible no matter where I have to deploy that immutable state to. And I would actually be interested to know kind of like if there's any kind of parallels of these ideas in biology.
Biologists.
Oh,
Wilson, Obi.
Man, it's how like what you said, Evan, it sounds very human-like to me. Even though when I think about this, can like the different parts in the computer have awareness? They just like follow orders, like they have some specific task that they would do, and when you take out certain things, they just like shut down or they perform the task differently. Is there really an awareness like human, or it's just following the task given?
And my comment is, with awareness, like every cell in our body, the outside of it has these protein-like tags that it basically says, I am me. And so if there's a foreign cell in there, it doesn't have the tag, so it's not recognized, and it can be destroyed by, killer T cells.
it's interesting.
Yeah, immunity.
Yeah, it's interesting.
What you were saying was something about how if a computer can learn what's going on around itself as a cell learns the same around itself, right? So isn't that something similar to how machine learning works in a way? Although it's mathematically based, I think it still applies to computing systems and autonomic computer systems. I don't know if that makes sense, Trey or Evan, but I feel like that's what you were asking, if I'm not mistaken.
I guess like me thinking about this, awareness is something that's related to general intelligence, and that's kind of like a direction that people who are working on AI are trying to get to. In terms of state and agents, programs being able to know state, that has like we have to implement that algorithmically right now. And so in some ways it's kind of like public private keys or key signing, to where if I give you guys all a key and we all meet and make sure that the key unlocks a lock, and we can make sure that no one else can forge that key, no matter how many people try to use the key to unlock the lock, only we would be able to unlock that lock. And it's interesting because it in some ways it's similar to how you're saying cells and protein and how they can determine what is right and what is not. And so yeah, using I guess like cryptography as a way to determine state, but then also using algorithms with cryptography to determine state is kind of like where we are. we're kind of still in rudimentary implementation level.
I keep on bringing it back to psychology. And are you guys familiar with the Dunning-Kruger effect, the cognitive bias where someone reads like an article or something and they believe that they're an expert because they read an article and like they don't actually understand that they don't understand?
Yeah.
That's a dangerous effect.
So like the analogy of a public-private key, it's like it's someone who only understands the public key. They actually can't access the server. They don't have the private key. So there's no awareness. They actually can't connect to it. So yeah, it's just like this awareness thing as a understanding of like information. I don't know. I think about things like an information, and yeah, that's it's interesting how many things it overlaps. Like with the proteins on the cells, the awareness, having these cells know what other cells are around it and which ones to kill, and then in obviously like building something that's trying to fix some sort of issue on a server or system and possibly destroying the DNS because you're unaware of it. But then you have public-private keys, and then in psychology you have the Dunning-Kruger effect. So it plays out in a lot of different fields.
What's an example of a public-private key?
I would think about it like you have your lock. That is your public key. Anyone can see your lock. You have the private key, and when you put it in, all the pins align and you can open it. So you can share your public key with anyone. My door, anyone walking by can see it. Have fun trying to break it. I mean, it's a lock. You can see it. But if you have the private key, then you get access.
Like, do I use that? Do apps on my phone use that? Or like, is that on my Facebook account? Like, how do I think about that?
They use like certificate signing, and it's a similar concept. So if the signature on the certificate matches the signature that they're looking for, then there's some sort of there's trust there. But there's a lot of different trust models. So the fundamental thing is what Trevon was saying about the public-private key. I would just at the fundamental level, we don't have to think about like anything like a computer. It's literally a key. It's just represented in numbers. Like you can think about the pins on a lock as numbers, and then the pins on the key as numbers. And when you put the key in the lock, the numbers match, it unlocks it. And that's the same thing with the computer. As long as the numbers match, it registers and there's trust, and you can move forward and access whatever you're trying to get to.
Okay.
Yeah, that was beautiful, wonderfully said. I couldn't have said it better, honestly. So yeah, I mean, and I guess kind of the last point is the reactive frameworks that, it's really interesting because this isn't even really related to computers. This is
John Boyd.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I wish the notes were up. I think it's I don't even. Yikes! Let me see. I had this down.
I love ODA loop cycles. I mean, it's so crazy that you have. I just finished reading the book, the biography of John Boyd. I just finished reading that, and that guy. So there's this Air Force pilot named John Boyd, and everyone gave him a really difficult time. He's a very stubborn guy, and in the end, like really no one had any respect for him because he was just a very standoffish guy. But he took what was a catastrophe in the Air Force, these airplanes that had radar, nuclear tactical bombing, close air support, air-to-air combat, all these functionalities built into it. And he said, get rid of all of it. What we have to do is create an aircraft built for air-to-air combat that can be at the top of the attack envelope and at the bottom of the attack envelope, because that's where the advantage is in air-to-air combat. And so you have to be able to get into your enemy's timing. It's like your enemy is going to expect you to do something. And when you do something either before that expectation comes, or you do something differently when they get to that point, you throw them off and you gain a tactical advantage because their loop has to restart. Their whole decision process has to restart all over again, whereas you know exactly what you're going for.
Yes, he just described it perfectly. The ODA loop stands for observe, orient, decide, and act, and you know, a lot of people are using kind of this way of thinking to algorithmically in some ways in terms of computers, but then also kind of, you know, in their mind, art of warfare, you know, type of philosophies, trying to figure out how to really optimize reacting in asymmetric interaction. So I think that's also the last slide. Got some references, but yeah. And then I guess MAPE and FOCAL relate to that directly. They're just different
I'm
naming
not
schemes.
familiar. So what is MAPE and FOCAL? What are those?
You know, I don't remember them off the top of my head. Yikes. I feel bad for putting them up there. I thought I was gonna have my notes, but
Homework.
yeah. Okay, wait, let me see if I could just, yes. MAPE is monitor, analyze, plan, execute. And then FOCAL is foundation, observe, compare, act, learn, and then reason. It's a little bit longer. They all basically say the same thing.
So like, what do you guys think about this observe, orient, decide, act cycle? Like, have you seen this type of thing in life? It's so fascinating because I feel like now that I've read that book, it's like, you know how like they say when you're looking for a car, you keep on seeing your car that you want to buy. It's like I see this loop cycle all the time. It's crazy. So I'd just like to know, like, you know, what does everyone else think about it?
Sounds like a really interesting and useful, quick, like decision making strategy. The book sounds interesting. I might take a look at that. So I was wondering, like, so is it like a philosophy that a programmer would use to try to approach problems? So I could see it applying, you know, almost I can even day to day. Like, how do I react to this? So those are my thoughts on it.
Well, I can't specifically talk about, I guess, programmers, but I guess in terms of like if I was a security analyst or I'm sitting in a SOC, right? You need to observe, you need to have some ability to be able to know what's going on. And then you need some type of analysis. So that's kind of like your orientation, figuring out, you know, what's going on, where is it coming from? And then trying to find some reactionable, like how can I respond, and then how can I act. And so a lot of kind of this methodology is baked into some frameworks. I guess like there's tools that try to incorporate a lot of this to where people who are sitting, you know, at these desks can be like, oh, this is what's happening, this is what this alarm is going off telling me, like this is what I need to do. And then I could just like click a button, you know, it reacts for me. Because it's so simple to be able to digest information and to be able to figure out like what to do. Now, is it the right reaction? Is, you know, what is up to the human to decide. But that's it's there's a lot of tools that are kind of like automating and augmenting kind of that whole thinking when it comes to systems. I guess in my understanding, I guess in my experience, just to say.
What it kind of reminds me of is in emergencies, they teach us you don't run if there's a car crash and there's someone who's on the street that looks like they have a broken leg. Like you gotta observe first, make sure there's not another car that's crashing in there. You gotta observe, then you gotta like walk in calmly, and then you decide what to do, and then order to be fast.
Yo, this goes back to awareness. This goes back to the awareness thing where it's like you make the problem worse by getting hit by a car. Now there's two people hit by a car.
Yeah. Seems like a nimble framework.
I agree. I was actually just thinking about I guess in terms of programmers, I guess they would use test cases, right? I guess that would be their orienting. I mean, the whole test cases and debugging cycle, it's like, oh, my code doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Let me put in a debugger. I mean, now modern days, I mean, some programmers in school, you know, we just put print statements and that's debugging, and we don't really, you know, find the true, you know, failure points of our program. But the whole debugging and testing process is kind of, yeah, what we have to do before acting in terms of programmers.
is it a good book, the John Boyd book? Is it like fun to read?
I cried at the end, man. I cried at the end. It was just so tragic what happened to him in the end. And
Oh my.
but, you know, he really was just a good guy. And his saying, he always gave people like a speech. I mean, he really inspired a lot of people to do things, big things, and reshape the Air Force. Basically, you know, really just, I don't think the U.S. would have been as devastating in Operation Desert Storm if it wasn't for John Boyd. That probably would have gone completely sideways. But he was known for saying, he always asked people, do you want to be someone or do you want to do something? Because he was a doer, and he never made it to general. The highest he made it to is colonel. And there were easy choices that he could have made, which would have put him in a position to become a general. But he was confrontational. He made the right decisions. He saved taxpayer money. He cared about people who were flying these airplanes. And because of that, you know, he didn't get to play the game. He didn't get to be someone. He did something.
And I feel like a lot of success is like finding people like that and then just just working with them as opposed to people who necessarily have titles. And that's cool.
Yes, great book for sure. John Boyd.
Just John Boyd?
Yeah, John and then Boyd, John Boyd.
That's the title of the book?
Yeah, it's his biography. Sorry.
Yeah.
Wait, John Boyd, a discourse on winning and losing?
No, I'm gonna. So, awesome presentation, Trevon. So,
Yeah,
awesome.
cool talk.
Cool. Thank you.
I like the connections to other subjects and like the pictures too.
I'm gonna stop the recording.